I'd like to welcome everybody to this week's edition of, I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Belonging series. And this week we've got the pleasure of having, sorry guys, there's something wrong with my screen. Right. Yep. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Belonging series. And this week we have Dr. Rahma Elmahdi. I know her as Red. I'm sorry, I always say her name wrong, right? But we've got Red, who is a exceptional young doctor who's working in the field of epidemiology at the moment. And we're going to go through some of the things which have helped to form her identity and helped to form her way of viewing life in this current situation. It's been a really fascinating time getting to know Red. And so I'm going to start off today's session by just asking Red a little bit about herself and ask her to give us some ideas of what it is that has motivated her, about her early life, and give us a clue as to, just give us a clue as to some of the things which has helped to form her identity so far. So Red, I'm going to just hand over to you.
Thanks, Wayne. And it's been an absolute pleasure, amongst many things, getting to know you as well in the last couple of years that we've been working together. So people know me as Red. Most people know me as Red, but my name's Rahma Elmahdi. I am currently doing a postdoc in the Department of Epidemiology in Denmark. I'm working on a project looking at the role of infection in immune-mediated diseases, specifically inflammatory bowel disease, which is very interesting. But my background is I'm clinically trained and I'm a doctor. I did my medical degree and PhD and also an intercalated BSc at Imperial. So I spent 10 years of my life at Imperial and then went off to do my foundation training in Scotland before coming back to Imperial to teach, and that's where I met Wayne, and I got the pleasure of getting to know him and getting involved with a lot of the EDI efforts that we're working on now that takes up a substantial part of my time as well. So my background or history is really a pretty classical one. I think it would be familiar to a lot of Africans. I was born in Khartoum in Sudan, and my family moved to the UK when I was about 5 years old. And I was raised just by my mum because my father passed away when I was 4 years old. And it was tough growing up a lot of the time. We were sort of restricted in income, probably the best way of putting it. And I sort of had a pretty normal new migrant experience in the UK. Went to a very sort of normal state school where I realized I was quite good at academic things and I quite enjoyed them, particularly science. And I had some excellent teachers who really pushed me to sort of consider a serious career working in science. And I just sort of latched onto that and went with it. I was very determined and dedicated and not so distracted, you could say, as sort of a teenager. Mm-hmm. And I knew I sort of wanted to do something vaguely related to science. And when I sort of sat down and thought, well, what is it that I'd like to do? Yeah. I realized, well, I quite like people. One thing that I really appreciate is helping people. I think that's always been a core value of my life. I've always wanted to see what I can do to sort of help. And sort of medicine made sense then in that case. So that's what I came to university to do.
So just before going on to university, I know you came over when you were 5. Did you notice, did you feel any different? I know it was a very early stage, so your memories of Sudan may not be kind of like fresh in your mind, but did you feel different? What was it like coming over as a 5-year-old?
So I do have some memories of those early days.
Mm-hmm.
I have memories of sort of the confusion,
Mm-hmm.
feeling very different.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't speak any English at the time.
Right.
And I do have a memory of being in a playground,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a little child, this little boy, stand in front of me, and I was sat on the stoop, and he was stood in front of me, and he was saying something, and I knew whatever he was saying was not nice, but I didn't understand a word of it. That's actually one of my earliest memories in the UK of living in London. And various other things like that. It was difficult for my mum as well.
Yeah.
English wasn't her first language.
Yeah.
So she had to navigate so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And my older siblings, luckily, were quite a bit older. So they really helped in bringing me up, and they've had a really huge impact on my life. But particularly my early years. So it was just a very foreign place. Those early memories were just made the UK very foreign, which is really weird to think now, because now I actually live in a different country and I feel very British and foreign for my Britishness as well. So that was quite, it's quite a strange thing to think back on. I mean, I remember my mum being very confused because we had to apply for something, and it said they needed an address. Yeah. And she was like, address? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't go on a form. I mean, luckily my big sisters came along and saved the day, but it's just all of those things, of being new to a country, not knowing a language, and trying to get your kids started in school. Yeah. And so yeah, it's been.
Because I know, I can't really imagine it coming to it, having kind of like being raised and grown in the UK. I can't really imagine having to have come across from another country and the difficulties with language and stuff like that. But to me, that sounds as though that was part of a determination. It helped. Would you say that helped to motivate you, or where do you get your motivation from?
Yeah, I think so. So I think seeing the resilience and the determination and the striving of my mother, being a single mother who was raising 6 children alone at the time, right? So she had to go through an incredible amount just to keep us healthy and happy. So I think seeing her resistance, her resilience in the face of quite a lot of hostility. I mean, I know it wasn't as bad as some stories I've heard from migrants from like sort of the post-40s era and things like that, Windrush generation in terms of racism and stuff, but we had loads of that. I have some really like overt racism stories from growing up as a child, which my mother experienced as well. And I think seeing her power through all of that was a very important part in sort of what's developed me. And I think I'm quite a lot like her in that sense. My sister recently told a joke actually about me, and she was just explaining how stubborn I was. And I thought, no, I'm not that stubborn. You've just always said that. But she said, you were so stubborn to the extent that if we wanted you to do anything as a child, we'd have to tell you to do the opposite. It's the only way to get you. So I think I did. It was weird. I kind of took on that challenge, and the more resistance, the more I kind of pushed.
But I'm just thinking as well, because based on what you had said about your academic achievements, the fact that you came to Imperial, and that when we think about where you started from, that whole idea of that motivation to do that, that stubbornness, that determination to get there. And then I think of it also in light of the fact that if we look at the narrative which media would want to put on, you are coming from one, a single parent background, two, you would be classed as an immigrant. So the chances of you going on to become successful based on media predictions would be virtually zero. Do you get what I mean? But
Yeah.
you have demonstrated and shown that it is possible. So part of it may be stubbornness, but there's more to it than just being stubborn. Can you think of anything else that helps that motivated you?
So in terms of sort of my academic success, I think it was always, again, this is something that's more common with immigrant families generally. There was always an expectation,
right,
from on the part of my mother and sort of wider relatives and people. There's an expectation that you will do well.
mm-hmm.
And I'm very lucky. I sort of came from a family, a wider family, and I had uncles and aunts, and who were very privileged in Sudan. My uncles are Oxford graduates,
right.
So I had a very strong, if you like, legacy of an expectation of doing well academically. Yeah. So in my mind, in my little world, I didn't really see myself as that portrayal in the media.
Right.
Even though bizarrely, obviously the statistics do mm-hmm. show that. Mm-hmm. And certainly that's not been the route that all of my siblings, for example. Yeah. But it kind of does cocoon you a little bit. Mm-hmm. This idea of family and expectation and tradition. It cocoons you from the mentality of being whatever the statistics are for coming from a single parent household and mm-hmm. being on low income and benefits and being like a black woman, whatever those statistics are. Yeah. So I'm very thankful for that. And I think that did serve, and certainly in my reading of the literature, I think that serves quite a lot as a protective sort of force. Mm-hmm. Having a tradition and an expectation where there was never any question that I, for example, wouldn't go to university.
Yeah.
Why would you go to university?
Yeah.
That was never questioned in my mind as a child.
Yeah. So you had role models effectively within your family, which helped you to say, actually, it doesn't matter. And I suppose this may well also be down to some of the stubbornness as well. It doesn't matter what, right? Right? It doesn't matter what other people are saying. I know that, so there was an inner strength within yourself to say, I can achieve it and I am going to achieve it, irrespective of what you say.
Yeah.
Am I kind of on the right lines with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're completely on the right line with that. I think if you come from and it's difficult to put your finger on it or be able to quantify it. And I think it's just I don't know, maybe some people describe it as some kind of form of social capital or something that comes from your culture or your people.
Yeah.
You can't get externally. Yeah. From anywhere else, and in fact it often flies in the face of what you're being.
Yeah, so it's I like that concept that you're bringing in there, that whole idea that it's despite what's going on, it's despite the media depictions, it's despite the expectations which other people may have, because you've got that core resilience and the example from your family unit, which tells you, you know what, I am special, I'm special, and I can achieve. Yeah? That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions with regards to Imperial, right? I may be treading on solid ground here, right?
Oh, Imperial, wait, let's go there. Yeah.
Right. So the two things which I'm going to ask is one about why did you pick Imperial College? What was the attraction of coming to Imperial College, right? And then tell me a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had whilst you've been at Imperial College. Yeah.
Yeah. So why did I pick Imperial? Honestly, that story is not a good one. It's not one of aspirational interest or like wanting to follow in the footsteps of you know, Huxley or Fleming or the greats or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was literally, I mean, I'd actually never heard of Imperial. So I had to ask my A-level teacher, like, is this a good university to apply to? Should I go there? And they were like, yeah, that's good. Yeah. But all I knew is I wanted to stay in London. And the other thing I knew is that when I interviewed with Imperial, they offered me a scholarship to help me pay for the first couple of years of my tuition fees.
Yeah.
Which UCL did not do, and neither did King. So I was like, there we go.
Right.
I know where I'm going. So really, that's the long and short of it. And then when I realized like they were such a, you know, prestigious university,
yeah.
which isn't sort of well known, I think, a lot of the time, particularly the school I went to.
Yeah.
If you don't know these things, you wouldn't necessarily know what kind of institution Imperial was. And I think not knowing as well then set me up for a bit of a culture shock when I arrived, which was, yeah, quite interesting. And I was suddenly found myself surrounded by very wealthy, white, and on the whole, because it's Imperial, men. And that was a bit of a challenge, I have to say. I think I wasn't quite ready for the impression people had of me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that comes with, in this, you know, it comes along with the same things that anybody has when they come to like you know, a very competitive, highly selective academic institution where you're sort of spun into used to being really good at what you do all the time, and suddenly you're like just like normal.
Yeah.
And then you have the added layer of what people think of you. That is, so your brilliance that you kind of knew is taken away somewhat.
Yeah.
And then on top of that is a superimposed, quite clear sort of view that people have of you that you never quite had before, because you were surrounded like other relatively, you know, black and brown people, more or less, who were who don't necessarily have an idea of what you are, because these other people hadn't really on the whole gone to school with people like me. So that was a bit of a shock, I have to say. And I think it's a common shock that occurs when you start at a university like Imperial. And for someone like me, there's not that many of us, as you know, Wayne. There's statistics for British home students who come through. Black students, is not many, but once you're there, it's a pretty similar experience, I would say, for us. And the coping was interesting, because initially I coped through assimilation.
Right.
Desperate efforts to try and fit in.
Yeah.
You know. And you know, it was just really the sort of try to speak differently, try to look different, was a bit more laddie.
Yeah.
To sort of try and fit in with that whole unfortunate, you know, culture that is there. So it's just trying to masculinize myself slightly, trying to, you know, engage in things that I never would have done. I mean, I'm gonna go skiing. I don't know what skiing. I'm sorry. I know this is like often a topic that upsets people, but yeah, no, I've never been skiing. I don't know what, you know, lacrosse is, and I've just never done these things. And so it was really hard, because I had to suddenly pretend like I knew, like this was a normal part of my culture. It wasn't.
So I'm just thinking about that, because it sounds like you were having to give up so much. Where did you get your grounding then from? Because it sounds as though you were having to, in order to try to feel as though you belonged at Imperial, right? Even though academically, clearly you should be here. But in order to feel like you belonged, you said that you were trying to assimilate, but you were assimilating. Why was it that what was the aspects of the culture which you were then trying to take on board in order to feel that you could fit in? What? I know it's quite a deep question, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the reason I did that, or felt the need to, you know, change the way I looked, sometimes talked, the things I did with my free time. The reason I did those things was because, whether consciously or unconsciously, I was being given a constant stream of signals that were telling me all of these things that are very much a part of who I am doesn't fit into what it means to be training to be a doctor at one of the best universities in the country.
Okay.
That was just the message. Yeah. And you know what, Wayne, I can list several sort of different microaggressions or issues with lectures, and the fact that I never had a black lecturer standing in front of me, actually, for the entirety of my medical career. I could list it, but it's how that comes together. Yeah. And the impact of all of those things, from the way your peers treat you to what you see represented, to kind of what you hear, and you realize that actually the whole world is telling you that, or this institution and this place is telling you that the things you are just incompatible with being there. Yeah. And I think that's why I felt that need. Yeah.
So let me ask another question, because when I've spoken with students at Imperial, one of the places which they have often found solace was, say, like within the Afro-Caribbean Society, right? I'm going to go there. How was that experience for you? Was it the same? Did you feel that you could get a cultural grounding there? What was it like?
Such a good question. I think we've spoken about this before, and I know why you brought this up. So I love the ACS. I love what it stands for. It does. I would go every year to Afro Gala, 100% supporting all of my brothers and sisters who were performing, who were doing great things. It was always a part of it. Like, I was there. I still have a picture from my freshers, and it was just like the black people in the year of 350. The 13 black people we had. So there was definitely a strong sense of a network amongst black students, right? Yeah. But I think the makeup of this kind of demographic makeups of black students at Imperial are slightly different from the black students who I knew from school, or who I grew up with, right? So it kind of became sort of the West African society, specifically. A lot of the time I felt the Nigerian society. Yeah. And there were very few of us who were East African, for example, or Caribbean. Yeah. Like just very few students who were. Yeah. And so entering the ACS, which should have been somewhere where, and I did actually had a lot of, some of my best Nigerian friends to this day, I met at that first ACS party, right? But there is a slight feeling of being a bit lost sometimes. And again, not being able to engage. A lot of the students were kind of international students whose parents were very wealthy, actually. Like, remember going shopping at one point with a friend of mine, and I was just like, wow, this is insane. The price she was, the amount she was spending on shoes for a first year student or whatever. It was actually a gift for her sister, but that's by the by. And just that feeling, at the end of the year, at the leaving party, the arguments would be about jollof rice. So I'm now attuned to every conversation argument about jollof rice. So it'd be like, but it was always going to be a jollof rice. It might be Ghanaian, it might be Nigerian, but it will always be jollof rice. So there wasn't too much of like injera or bamia falafel, the kind of stuff we eat. It's fine. And at the end of the year, I remember just before leaving, and this is actually genuinely, Wayne, I'm sad to say, the reason why I didn't pay membership for the ACS from the second year onwards was everybody kept saying to me on their way out leaving, see you in Lagos.
Yeah, okay.
See you in Lagos this summer. Yeah. And that really sums it all up. Yeah. It's the ACS is an awesome place, and it does have diversity, but the vast majority are pretty wealthy international Nigerian students, who are great people and who I love, but it was hard for me.
At that point in time, it was almost can I say it was almost like a very big culture shock in many kind of areas, from the point of view of where you came from and the kind of students who you mixed with throughout your formative years, A levels, etc. And
Yeah.
now you've got the contrasting of very wealthy white people, very wealthy black people, right, who may well get on better because of their wealth. And then from your perspective, where you were coming from, it was as though I don't belong in either one of those worlds. Am I kind of on the right tracks with that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I consciously
Yeah,
was aware of that, but
yeah,
I think you're right. I think that's what made the experience. It was very hard to find my place.
yeah. When we're thinking about the idea of belonging, it wasn't that you couldn't belong, but you felt that in order for me to feel as though I can fit in, I have to change who I am in order to be accepted by either them or be accepted by them. And I can't, so I suppose my question, did you ever feel that you could be your authentic self whilst you were there, or whilst you were here?
Whilst I was here, so I think that's changed, because I spent over 10 years. I spent
That's what I mean.
at Imperial, and then I came back as staff, and so it certainly changed. But honestly speaking, I think it's only very recently that I've got the knack of bringing more of my authentic self to work. Right. And I actually don't think I ever did that really when I was studying and certainly working at Imperial. I don't think I actually did that. Mm-hmm. It changed over time, as I sort of became more aware of these things. And I think a lot of us have to go, I think minority people, we kind of go through life and we kind of have a feeling that something isn't quite right in the way that we're being treated in our institutions and organizations, but we don't really know what to put our finger on it or the language to express it. And it's only sort of in more recent years when I've started to begin to understand, issues of how bad the statistics really are, how issues of structural racism and its various forms that it takes, and issues of representation, and how important that is, being able to just see someone senior who looks like you, that you can relate to. And that's when I've kind of began to understand why I was so uncomfortable in my own skin, as it were, in these places. And started loosening up in terms of, so I kind of replaced the narrative of assimilation with, over time, and it took a long time, and still there was resistance to that, but tried to replace it with just a narrative of, at what point do you cut yourself some slack and say, actually, you probably should be here, after, how many degrees, how many years, like, what do you need to publish? What point do you just come to terms with the fact that, you're good enough to be here in whatever form? And I think that was a really difficult process for me. And, I think I still deal with it from day to day, but
I can see that a lot of people are now putting some questions in, and I want to come to those, but I do want to ask you one other question before we go to the questions, because I can talk with you for hours. I just love talking to you, right? But one of the other, so in terms of, I like this idea of this transition, that it's not the 18-year-old Red is different to the Red who then has gone on to do other things. It's been a gradual changing process, right? So kind of like a two-part question again. What support has helped you to kind of come to that realization within yourself? Or has there been anything that has helped you to, as you said, cut yourself some slack? What was it? Are there any specific things that you can think that you can almost point to and say, this was something which helped me to kind of like just release, to say it's okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And I think sort of one of the big support systems I had was my, certainly for a lot of my time at Imperial, was, I don't think she was ever officially my mentor, but she was a mentor for much of my life, and she was my PhD supervisor as well. And just having someone who seemed to, and I often spoke to, and this is Professor Helen Ward at the School of Public Health, someone who I could speak to, who sort of understood to a certain extent what it was to be very different in your department.
Yeah.
And you know, she's one of the sort of first women professors in the School of Public Health, and she does a lot of work and has been with Athena Swan and the rest of it. So I think she also has an awareness of what the challenges might be, right?
Yeah.
So she was a huge support to me, certainly. And I think just finding other societies where I had a very clear shared interest, right? Where that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And when I began to realize I couldn't necessarily find that in just like a cultural society like ACS, although I remained you know, attending those things and supporting and being involved with all of these different types of my identities. Yeah. What I really found is like my best support systems were in people who were doing lots of like global justice work in terms of health. Yeah. And it's sort of through shared ideas and connections, yeah, that I was sort of able to transcend this idea of myself as other, you know, yeah, because I found small corners and places, yeah, and groups of people that were just as passionate about some things as I was, yeah, and we worked very hard together for those things.
So it was environments where you were valued for this, not necessarily the skills, but were valued for, yeah, I suppose the skills that you had, the opinions that you had, where your opinions, it wasn't based on color, it wasn't based on wealth, it wasn't based on anything else, but it was just based on the fact that, you know, Red has something to say, right? And we want to hear what she's got to say because we value what Red has to say. Am I kind of like right in summing that up like that?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's just more related to, it's just finding like-minded people.
Yeah.
Who, yeah, see you for who you are, and I see them for who they are. Yeah. And I think that's a very, very valuable thing, and can be, yeah, more valuable than simply finding someone who looks like you.
Yeah. So
for coping, because sometimes, as I've just said, mm-hmm, you know, that's not always the whole picture, particularly when you have when you come from, particularly when I have, I think, so many confusing identities. I joined the Arabic Society for a while as well. This is another thing, because I'm you know, Muslim and Sudanese, and, yeah, we speak Arabic, so it was always going to be hard for me, yeah, to find my place quite.
Yeah.
So I've created my place with other people.
Yeah. Brilliant. Right, I've got some questions, right? You know, as I said, I could just carry on talking to you, but I better let the others have a go as well, right? Yeah. Williams had to jump off the call, but he was asking a question relating to your Black British identity and whether or not that has now changed because you're now living abroad. So he wanted to know about that second transition, as it were, because you're in Denmark now. So how is it now for you calling yourself Black British?
Oh my goodness!
Sorry, can I jump up?
Sorry. Oh, I didn't.
I've got to jump up. Can I just add as well? I was also fascinated because you say you got a family, come from a family of 6.
Yeah.
So do your brothers and sisters feel the same way, or has their trajectory been quite different to yours? So I'm sorry, yeah, that I can't stay on after. But.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll answer quickly to sort of, but it's been very different routes that we've all taken. But I think something that has certainly, on average, helped all of us is this knowledge we were raised with, that there was an expectation of doing well academically. Not all of us did. Not all of us even went to university, or even, you know, but it's something that I'm sure helped us in just sort of validating a little bit ourselves, this idea that there was no reason why we couldn't do these things, and knowing that it was a norm in like my wider family. But no, it certainly hasn't played out exactly the same for all of us, right? And certainly some of my siblings have had really tough roots, and just dealt with some really incredible things that, you know, you need to write a book about some of the experiences that people have when they're trying to go into university or professions in this country, you know, in terms of the racism. So so no, it's not sufficient. I mean, but I think it's necessary.
Yeah.
So that sort of makes sense.
Yeah. What about this? The other part of William's question, which was about the Black British identity now that you're abroad. And
yes.
Yeah,
all right. So I've got news for everyone who hasn't. I actually think it's really interesting because people, and don't get me wrong, like I am looking a lot at Danish society and organizing with Black Lives Matter here as well. So they have a serious issue with race in this country. Interestingly, it's not as bad so people in my department professionally think of me as the British person.
Right, okay.
And it becomes the larger, more formative part of your identity, at least in relation to the way people see you when you go abroad. And I remember Marcia Wilson in a talk that she was given about her experiences when she went abroad. She said that was very much the same thing. And it's kind of this awful notion that is ingrained in a lot of predominantly white societies that are quite racist, is that there's no blacks as bad as our blacks. Other people's, like, that's fine. You know, Danes love Americans, they love Brits, they love Black Americans and everything about their culture. And this has been sort of a thing that has happened through history. You know, even James Baldwin sort of describes this kind of Parisian utopia. And I can guarantee the Black people in Paris at the time were not feeling this way. So I think that's been a very interesting experience. And when I do feel nervous or hostility, it's because I suspect that and as soon as I open my mouth and a British accent rolls out, everybody's just, delighted. So I think that's been really interesting, being seen as a British person in my work for the first time and not having so many qualifications around my race.
That's very interesting, that notion that the Britishness, when you're abroad, almost trumps your blackness, because the home blacks are worse than our own blacks are worse than international blacks. That notion, I'm going to have to play with that one in my mind for a little while, because
it's weird, but I think this is not, you know, it's not a unique thing that I'm experiencing. I think it's a thing.
Okay, I see Tanwi. Do you want to come on mic and ask your question? Just unmute yourself and.
Hi. Well, first of all, can I?
Could you just speak up a little bit? I just can't quite hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Hi. Brilliant talk. Can I just first ask you, how do you pronounce your name? I'm from Sudan. أنا تنوير.
Rahma Elmahdi.
Rahma, okay, because I saw red and that's okay. The last name, yes, but then your first name. Rahma, that was just brilliant, because I am I'm first generation and I have 2 daughters. I remember I did talk about this before, that it's my experience here is completely different to their experience. And to hear you now talking about sort of when you started university, you were really trying hard to fit in. And I can see that this is what they're doing now. They're 13 and 14. They can't express it as well as you did now. And thank you, Wayne, the questions. You just you ask the right questions. And for you to say that, for me, it was great to hear, because I think they have this struggle of identity and finding their or I know that they're young, but it's just it's the small things that, for example, you'll be probably very aware of this when I just speak in front of their friends and I say words like, for example, pancake, and they hate me for it. It's pancake, mom. And it's all these accent issues and what I wear, and it's just yeah, it was brilliant to hear you talking. I think it was a real eye-opener for me. I'm sure it's probably your parents will feel this, because it's completely different experience for us here. I mean, I came to this country for my postgraduate studies, so I'm very comfortable in my own skin, and I hear all these things that sort of people struggle with, Black people struggle with, Black females struggle with. I see it, and it does. I see it and I feel it, but it does not hit me as hard. I think because I'm already established. I already know where I am. I'm comfortable where I am. I brush it aside. Now I'm living a sort of a different experience, because now I am looking at my daughters who are Black British. They're not, they are more Black British than they are Sudanese, really. And yeah, I think I'm living it through them. So yeah, brilliant talk. Fantastic.
Well,
Thank
you
you
so much. And yeah, it would be great to catch up sometime.
Absolutely. I was going to ask to take your kind of contact. It would be lovely to chat with you. And then also because they always think that I'm too old, I don't know anything. And you know, as a mom, you say, oh, I know it all. But to be honest, I don't. I brought them here in this country. They're living a completely different life than where I was brought up, and it is this, they have their own struggles, and it's very important for me to try and kind of understand this, and yeah, sort of yeah, it's important to try and understand it. You know how Sudanese moms are.
Yeah.
So I have this internal battle that, oh, I have to be myself, but then, oh no, I just have to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, exactly. And it is everything you've described. It's a different experience. You don't know what they're going through, and that being socialized as Black British and growing up. I mean, I have older siblings even who do not understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
So and they're sort of between 10 and 14 years older than me. So again,
I think it's a generation thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then when Wayne asks you the question about sort of your support network, and you try to fit in, and I can see this is in their school. They try to fit in with the Caribbean, with the kind of the Nigerian, but then even with Arab, and they're not finding their place. It's just this kind of this unique place. And I don't know whether it's always now this question is always a question that I'm asking. Is it it shouldn't be because of luck. When you were talking about, I missed that bit when you were saying that there was someone who really supported you. And does it have to be this? I mean, is it because you're lucky that you were in that environment, Imperial, you had sort of, you know how to navigate, you know where to find your support system? It shouldn't be this way. So, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
I was
great. Loved listening to you. Fantastic.
Thank you very much. I'll drop my email in the chat. So
brilliant.
Thank you very much. Sally, I believe you've got a question as well, please. If you want to come in, please.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah.
Perfect. Hello, Red. So lovely to see you and to hear from you again. Always a pleasure. I just had two super quick questions. I wanted to ask, because you mentioned microaggressions and various other discrimination that you experienced at Imperial. And I'm wondering if we had the report and support tool been in place at that time, do you think you would have used it? Is my first question.
So that's a really good question. admittedly, I don't know the details of the report and support tool, but I imagine it relates to sort of confidentially being able to report incidents like this that you'd experience. So it would, if I'd have known about it, that would have been the first thing that would be really important. So I think with a lot of initiatives meant to reduce these kind of things in the workplace, actually a lot of BAME people don't really know about them. So if I'd have known about it, it would be the first big thing. And then the second thing is, I'm not quite sure, particularly in my early years of desperately just trying to fit in, and with all that meant in terms of just taking my discrimination, or the discrimination I was experiencing, as part and parcel of the cost of being in this space. So I think in my early years at Imperial, certainly not, sadly.
Yeah,
but,
no, I completely understand.
Yeah, and I think that's still the barrier.
That's really insightful, I think, because it's almost not, I'm not going to say it's a deficit model, but it's almost that we're almost, how can I put it, conditioned to believe that what we have to offer isn't as good as what somebody else is saying we must have. And so it's placing more value in something that somebody else has. It's almost like the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, yeah? When in reality, you should be nurturing the soil, which is in your own, so that the grass is as green on your side. But all you know, your grass is actually better than the grass on the other side, but you've been always told and conditioned that that grass is better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it's how do we as a people kind of like inject that self-worth, that value in what we have, that value in of our culture and everything like that, that we can be our authentic selves wherever we are. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got to not stop, because I know Sunday wants to come in, because he's got a fairly interesting question. I'm not sure if I should put him on screen.
No, not really. I was so sad as I was getting to know you and start working with you. You only attend one of my workshop, and then you disappeared.
I'm sorry.
And then all these kids were asking, that lady, that red lady, when are you bringing her back? When are you bringing her? And then I found out you were gone. Why? Why now during Brexit? Why are you Brexiting UK?
I know, I probably shouldn't, but yeah, it's I'm being sensible. This is the other thing. It's important to do your tactical postdocs abroad, in you know, so it's the right thing to do. But next time I'm in London, I'm not gone.
That's brilliant. You know what? I'm just wary of time. Reg, you know that we can sit down and we can talk, and I always enjoy the insight which I gain from you from our conversations. I'm going to just ask one final question, right? And I want to just say a big thank you to you as well for coming on this afternoon. One final question. What advice would you, I'm just thinking with regards to what Tanwir had said, right? What advice would you give to her 13 and 14-year-old daughters, right? She's praying, she's got, make sure that they watch this afterwards, all right? What advice, this is especially for them. I don't know their names, but I'll find out. What advice would you give to them?
Selma and Yasmin.
Selma
and Yasmin.
Yes, Selma or Yasmin. There you go.
So I think the advice I would give is the advice I give to anybody who is entering an institution like Imperial, or trying to navigate largely like white spaces in their life generally. And that is to remember that, you know, wherever you happen to be or find yourself, whichever group that you're a part of at that point in time, there is a reason why you're there. You're meant to be there. I mean, you can't qualify your position on things like, oh, they just let me be here, or they just included me because they were kind, or something I often hear, by the way, from students at Imperial. Oh, you know, maybe I was just a diversity hire or a diversity like quota student, which is like implausible, because by the way, Imperial don't do diversity quotas, right? If they did, they might be doing a bit better. So the reason you're there is on your own merits. You have a reason to be in the spaces you occupy because you are of value in the spaces you occupy. And I think that's the one piece of advice that I think it's just super important to give, that will really help in sort of navigating that, being self-assured that you're meant to be where you are, and what you bring is just as valuable as the next person. So that would be it.
Brilliant, thank you very much. But as Sunday said, I wish you were here. It's yeah, we need young people like you who've lived this and sort of tell their own experience. Then it's more believable than me going to tell them this, because yeah, it's just gonna go over their head. So
children don't listen to their parents. You get somebody else in to come and, you know, spell it out. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic, thank you very much.
No problem. Oh.
If I can, I also have a question just before you finish. Thank you very much, Red, for speaking and telling us your story. I think I posted something in the chat, didn't have a chance to see. There's that saying, so I'm also, my family's originally from Kenya, but I came here when I was quite young, and there's that saying of where you're too foreign for where you left and too foreign for where you now call home. So it's trying to find where's the right place in between them. So I guess my question is, how do you balance the different aspects of that Black British identity, your Sudanese identity, considering the profession you're in, especially as a medical person?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's so valuable. I can't tell you how priceless all of my identities are. And particularly in the work I do. I remember when I was on an acute take job, it was my first job in Scotland and at the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh. And one of the first patients to come in on that take was a Sudanese woman who only spoke Arabic. And she was really distressed. And it was after sort of being able to say, so she was first read in by the A&E consultant who admitted her to us. He couldn't really figure out what was going on. He'd run some tests on her, and she was handed over to the next junior doctor. And I'm like, this woman is speaking Sudanese Arabic. Like, I would really would like to go and find out what was going on. And so much of what she was experiencing and what was happening to her, she was actually medically fine. We ran so many tests. We checked her bloods, did an ECG because she was experiencing palpitations. But it turned out to be a panic attack. She was having a panic attack because she just moved to the country and she was completely overwhelmed. And I remember that experience reminding me just how valuable I am, because I was there to help this one woman, you know, regardless of all of my other training as a doctor or the rest of it. Just the fact that I was a voice and a face she could recognize made that woman's experience, and probably actually her memories of her first months in the UK, a bit more bearable. And that's a blessing. That's such a blessing, which is completely overlooked in so much of sort of professional registries or the rest of it. You know, it's like beyond, you know, the usefulness of speaking another language. I think people don't understand just how useful it is to be able to identify with someone who is othered and who is foreign in that way. Yeah. So I personally just find the places where I know that I'm able to help, and that I just go with those. Yeah. And actually it's in the intersections of my identities that I'm the most useful.
Okay, thank you very much. Wayne, I don't think we can hear you, but
Sorry, Red. I don't know. You can hear me now.
Yeah.
There's a petition that's just been started to get Red to return. Right. So I think. So see, Sunday came. Everybody's on board with this one. So we've got lots of people who are saying, "Girl, don't stay too long over there. Right. Get what you need to, but get back here. We need you. Right. We need you. Right. It's from a place of love. You're all in our hearts, and we want to see you back. It's wonderful. We know that you're doing what you're doing, and you're doing a fantastic job there. But we miss you. All right.
I miss you all so much as well. Really, it's just
Right.
so good to speak to so many of you again, and yeah.
We want you back. All right. Right. Listen, I'm gonna just share and just let you know what we've got on for next week. And so next week's guest will be Selassie from the Great British Bake Off of 2016. He's going to be our guest next week. So please tune in. We can get some baking tips. If you've got any questions about food and all of that, please send them through. So we've got a really good discussion for next week. And if you've missed any of the talks, then please tune in to the Belonging series on YouTube. I know a lot of people have been, and there's a lot of insight that you can gain from there. So once again, I want to say thank you to Red for joining us this afternoon. We're going to have a short after party, as is our usual custom, but tune in again next week and we'll be having Selassie with us then. So thanks again, and we will see you very soon. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
We just stop.